Well, the black flag of ISIS and al-Qaeda now being raised over the capital of Damascus, Syria. The country's president, Bashar al-Assad, now in Moscow, Russia. And the country that was once one of the most peaceful countries in the world is now basically being run by terrorists backed by the CIA and the West. So if you're in America or you're in the Western country and you're waking up this morning trying to understand what in the heck happened in Syria, I think this headline here, you could probably point to this headline, which shows in Syria, in the Los Angeles Times, in Syria, militias armed by the Pentagon fight those armed by the CIA, to which Elon Musk tweeted, wait a minute, our tax dollars are somehow funding both sides once again? And now that country lays in ruins today. For insight and analysis on Syria, let's ask Syrian journalist Kevork Almassian, friend of the show, who's clearly not gotten very much sleep over the past couple of weeks. Kevork, thank you for joining us here on Redacted, as always.
Thank you so much, Clayton, for the opportunity.
So where do things stand right now? I've seen it thrown around on social media that what we know of Syria as a country will cease to exist. Is that an accurate depiction, or are they being hyperbolic here?
I don't want to make bold predictions, but I think this is going to be the case. I think Syria, as we know it, is over. Syria was not only peaceful country, but it was secular country in its unique way. And it's not like the Western secular countries. Secularism in the West usually means the separation of the religion from the state. And it also means that somehow going against religions. But in Syria, secularism meant that all religions and sects and minorities and ethnicities and the majorities all coexist, and they are equal in front of the law. And the government had a strong, let's say, Jacobean force to even force this lifestyle on the people if some of the radical groups or radical, let's say, sects try to change that reality. I think this is going to be over sooner or later. What we're seeing nowadays is an Islamist conquest of Syria. Armed groups directly funded by the United States, CIA for a long time, by the Turkish intelligence, by the Qatari intelligence. And they're going to try to establish a type of a country under which these regional countries have spheres of influence. Turkey is going to have a sphere of influence in the north, especially in Aleppo till Homs. And then Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Israel are going to have an influence in the south. Israel already invaded Syria since the fall of Assad, and they occupied the higher hills inside Syria in order to have better observation points. And today, the spokesperson for the Israeli occupation forces in Arabic says that if the Druze minority ask for the protection of Israel, they're going to come for help, which means they're eyeing on a city called As-Suwaida in order to conquer it and also annex it later like they did with the Golan Heights. The groups on the ground who marched from Aleppo and they were unleashed basically by Erdogan, they call themselves Islamists. They say they want to establish Islamic State. I'm not analyzing these things. They are the ones say that our fight against Assad was to remove a secular infidel regime, as they describe it, and establish an Islamic State. And in the Western governments labeled this group, which conquered Syria, as a terrorist organization because HTS was basically Al-Nusra Front, which is the offshoot of Al-Qaeda. And Jolani was basically the founder of the offshoot of Al-Qaeda in Syria, and he was part of ISIS. Then, because the CIA always have brilliant ideas, as we know historically, I'm just being sarcastic, they tried to rebrand this guy. So they changed the name of the group, and they asked him to start wearing suit and giving interviews to American press. It started with PBS, and now it's CNN.
It's unbelievable. So CNN, yes, and in fact, Caitlin Johnstone, great journalist Caitlin Johnstone, has pointed out, it's basically like the Democrats in Washington have tried to rebrand this terrorist as a woke good guy. Like, forget the fact that, yes, he beheaded a lot of people. Yes, forget the fact that he's part of Al-Qaeda. Now he's our guy, and he's CNN putting him on the air and trying to normalize this guy.
If you remember, Clayton, after October 7, what they said about Hamas, everything they said about Hamas, that Hamas has allegedly committed all these crimes were all committed by the group of Al-Jolani. And we have video evidence, and we have countless number of videos showing decapitation, slaughtering people, cooking people's heads, severed heads, and basically killing women for leaving their home and accusing her of adultery. This is the type of ideology that Jolani believes, basically. And he came to Damascus, and he is now occupying my capital, basically. And under such a rule, it's going to be very difficult for a person like myself, and I'm an ethnic Armenian and a Christian, to go back as a visitor or to go back and live. It's not like they're going to kill everyone now in the streets, because they are now in the process of controlling all the state institutions. But on the long run, Syria is going to become an Islamic state, under which
what will happen? Well, I was going to say, what will happen to the Christians there? This never gets any coverage. I mean, the Christians will be persecuted, driven out.
Actually, Clayton, in the past 14 years, the CIA and the regional intelligence, they have funded and supplied weapons to these groups which already committed ethnic cleansing against the Christians. 80% of the Christians already fled the country. And there were NGOs, Clayton, something that I'm sure most of your viewers do not know. There were NGOs in Lebanon where many Christians fled. And once you arrive in Lebanon and you apply for this NGO, they could send you to Canada, they could send you to Australia, they could send you to the United States in a matter of 3 months. Once you arrive to Lebanon and you're a Christian and you apply for these NGOs in this resettlement policy, they would take you in 3 months to one of the Western countries, which means they have facilitated emptying Syria from its Christians. Syria had over 10% of its Christians. I believe the numbers are now below 2%. And the Armenian community is also 90% is fewer now. This is the same case in Iraq. Iraq had 1.5 million Christians, and now it has 150,000 Christians, which gives me the impression that this is not some sort of a miscalculation. This is a deliberate destabilization efforts, and there are groups funded by the Western governments who commit ethnic cleansing against the Christians, and then the NGOs also help them move to the Western countries in a bid to empty the Middle East or West Asia from the Christians, because we have to remember West Asia, the Levant, is the birthplace of Jesus Christ, and they're trying to empty this region from its Christianity because they have a different interpretation of Christianity, some of which some people call it Christian Zionism. And with the presence of strong, let's say, Orthodox Church, Catholic Church in these countries that are patriotic and they're against foreign interference, this is going to be harder for the Western imperialists to sell their wars in the region. But if you empty the Christians from the region and then present yourself as a savior for the minorities, this is going to be a better marketing strategy for them to come to the region and basically colonize it. And at the moment, I see that different countries, mainly the United States, Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and Israel are the ones who are going to manage the affairs of Syria through their proxies. They have different groups, and each group will have its share in the government. So Syria is likely going to be disintegrated, and this is the really nightmare. This is why many people stood by Assad and supported him, because they saw him a symbol for the unity of Syria. And once he is gone now, I think Syria is going to head to really serious darkness.
What is the goal of the CIA? What is the goal of Israel? We had Joe Kent on the show last week, who said he didn't believe that Israel would want the destabilization of this country, the collapsing of this country. But now, as you pointed out, they have invaded Syria, and they're occupying large swaths of it in the south. What does the CIA want out of this, a collapse of Assad and his government? And what does Israel want as a collapse of this government?
Actually, the Americans do not have strategic interests in Syria. They are basically doing the Israeli bidding. This is not America's war, although they dump the money, but it's Israel's security interests, and it's Israel's interest that the Americans are trying to achieve. Israel wanted to destabilize Syria, and they have the Israeli officials, Israeli press, former head of Mossad, former defense minister, all confessed that they have supplied weapons, medical treatment, and cash to this same terrorists of HDS when they used to occupy the borders with Israel. They used to go to Israeli field hospitals, take medical treatment. Netanyahu shakes hands with them, and they come back and fight against the Syrian government. What Israel wanted is to cut the supply chains of Hezbollah from Syria. Syria used to be a territory where weapons were sent to Hezbollah in Lebanon in order to continue the armed struggle against the Israeli occupation forces in southern Lebanon. So they saw Syria as an important player in what was called basically the axis of resistance against the American-Israeli hegemony over the region. So they needed to cut the supply chains and install a puppet government which accepts to normalize ties also with Israel. Under Assad rejected and didn't sign on a peace treaty. But from the Israeli perspective, a peace treaty is a surrender deal. You have to surrender your sovereignty. You have to give Israel all what it needs. Therefore, that's why they wanted to remove Assad from power.
I'm curious about why it seemed there was such little resistance from the Assad side. It seemed like they were able to march in pretty quickly into Damascus and take over the government. Of course, Assad is now in Russia. I think a lot of people wondering why. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe to my mind, it wasn't. It was a brutal fight. But it seemed like there was little resistance, and there wasn't much of a fight. What do you make of that?
Actually, very good question. This was something that I was thinking about for a long time. I think that when the first attack on Aleppo happened and the Syrian army was overwhelmed, a decision was made to retreat and to redeploy. But they didn't want to lose all the territories. But once the attack happened, there were agreements between Turkey and Russia which disallows such type of attacks on the Syrian army. So Assad flew to Moscow for talks with Putin, and it seems something was cooked there, and probably Putin told Assad that there are going to be major changes in Syria, and Syria and Russia, Turkey, and the rest of the regional countries have come to the conclusion that this has to be solved quickly. So what happened, basically, he returned to Damascus, and the opposition, which they call it in the press opposition, this HDS, they were already in central Syria. And decisions after decisions were made by the higher command of the Syrian army to retreat. They didn't fight. And this gives me the indication that probably there was a tacit coup from the army, that they didn't want to follow the orders of Assad, or Assad himself ordered the peaceful, retreat of the Syrian forces to Damascus. And once they arrived to Damascus, another order was given for them to lay down their arms. At night, he fled to Moscow. And this is something I believe was unbelievable for many Syrians to see Assad leaving the country, and many people who believed in Assad for being the symbol of resistance against American hegemony has crumbled, and many people were very disappointed by this, and many people now call him a traitor because they expected him at least to stay in Damascus and follow his constitutional duties, and just tell to the people honestly that there is a deal, and this is above our capacity to resist. If the international powers have agreed, let's make a deal, 6 months transitional period, and we hold new referendum or elections, and then I leave. But he didn't do that. He left at midnight to Moscow, which was very, I would say it was humiliating for himself as well, because then his name in the history will not be written in the best way that he may have wished for.
Right. I'll get you out of here on this, Kevork, which I know you haven't slept in many days. You've been sharing photos of your old neighborhood where you grew up in Syria and family. Just your thoughts as you see these images and these individuals walking through your old neighborhood where you would go to school.
Actually, it's very heartbreaking. Many people do not understand because they see Syria as just some other political file that they are analyzing and claiming to be pundits, And this is our homeland. This is our place where I was born and raised, and memories. And seeing Syria is changing in front of my eyes from a place where it respects multiculturalism, the real multiculturalism, and not engineered multiculturalism from political force. Syria has been a melting pot for different civilizations and cultures and religions and ethnicities. And seeing now my country is occupied by this internationally designated terrorist group, on Jolani's head there is $10 million bounty, and he's just moving around like and accepted by everyone, and he's now a diversity friendly, and he's now probably next year he's an ally for the LGBTQ community. I mean, the rebranding is really it's serious. I mean, if you see the rebranding, you know that this is a democratic rebranding, because they're using the same terminologies that they always use to sell their narrative to the people: diversity, multiculturalism, this and that. But Jolani himself doesn't believe in multiculturalism and doesn't believe in all these things. But he's a stooge, he's a proxy. So the U.S. considers Jolani, according to the former envoy of the U.S. to Syria, James Jeffrey, as an asset for the American strategy in the country. So they all used him to completely destroy Syria. And now once he reaches to power, they're trying to disintegrate the country. This is what foreign powers do, basically. And if there are anyone who should be ashamed, and we are the ones who failed our country. So I don't blame the enemies, because the enemies do what the enemies do, but it's us who should have protected our country in a better way.
And CNN elevating this guy. Yeah, pretty soon he'll be the next spokesperson for Bud Light, I wouldn't doubt, as well.
Yeah.
Kevork, great to see you. I'm so sorry that this is happening. Thank you so much for your analysis and insight, as always. And our heart goes out to you and the Syrian people for this disaster. Thank you so much, Kevork.